Hi folks, Successors here. Now, I want to have a look at this little knife here. Now, I put it in my high-end knife collection, partly because it belongs to the same person that most of the high-end knives belong to, but also because it's kind of squeezed itself into that sort of market, if you like. It's called the Full Immunity and it's by Benchmade. Now, I'll talk about the knife in a second, and then at the end we'll talk about the one or two flaws. I don't know if they're fatal flaws, but they're significant. Beforehand, though, let's start with this. A few years ago, Benchmade came out with the Bug Out. Now, the Bug Out, this is a Bug Out, but this isn't the one they came out with originally. It came out with blue plastic scales and S30V blade in satin finish. Its real selling point was the fact it weighed 1.8 ounces, which made it very, very light. The downside to that was that even though plastics can be very good these days, when you squeezed the knife sort of here, you could feel it flex. I don't think it was likely to break, but it did flex. Now, this version that I've got is the I don't know what the number is. I can't remember the number, it doesn't really matter, but this is the one with the aluminium scales and sunburst design. You can get titanium scales for these, but I actually quite like the aluminium because it's considerably lighter than titanium. This one is a black coated blade, which I could do without particularly, as it's M390. It's pretty stainless steel, doesn't really need the coating, but I do like the scales on this. It is quite expensive. I can't remember the actual price of it now, but it's relatively expensive, and we'll come back to that bit in a minute. Anyway, so there have been a number of offshoots from the Bug Out. The principal one directly from the Bug Out is the Mini Bug Out. I don't have one of those, but another one, they've started kind of a Be Out sort of whole genre. So there's the Bailout, which is this one. Now this one again originally came with a sort of plastic scales. I think they were called CF Carbon Elite or something like that. So they weren't just straightforward plastic, but they were still plastic of some variety. And I can't remember what the blade steel was. It might have been 3V or something like that. It doesn't really matter. It wasn't really of much interest to me till this came out. And this I've had since long before the my aluminium Bug Out. This is the Bailout in with aluminium scales, a sort of dry green finish, non-reflective, a bit slightly different colour, but similar to when you get a 940. Perhaps the biggest selling point for this, for me, is the CPM M4 blade. And like the Bug Out, I should really have said, one of the ways that the Bug Out became particularly light was because it had a very thin, slicey blade. And that's been a real game changer, I think, in the market, because thin, slicey blades, the sort of thing that we've had for decades in traditional knives, have become the thing. And this has a very thin, slicey blade with a swedge. It's pretty much flat ground blade, but I say it's in CPM M4, so it stays very sharp. It's quite easy to sharpen, surprisingly easy to sharpen, I think, but it stays sharp for a long, long time, and I actually think it's a really good knife. I'm not sure about the glass breaker on the end. I could live without that, and the latest versions of this, they don't have the glass breaker anymore, so I think Benchmade have sort of listened to that. They're also doing it in different colours that are not so sort of tactical. This has a sort of grey Cerakote finish, which in this case I quite like because M4 is a semi-stainless steel. Anyway, I got this knife and I showed it to the guy that lends me all the other knives, and he quite liked it, but I think he thought it was a little bit on the big side. Certainly would be too big to even think about carrying in the UK. Not that you could carry it at all, because it's a lock knife and all of that, but there's a difference between what is absolutely the law and what you might get away with, and this is just no way you're going to get away with it. It's well over 3 inches. It's a 3-inch blade, and it kind of looks a bit threatening, and it has what is rather euphemistically called a tanto blade. Now, I have ranted about this many times, so I'm not going to go on about it again today, but it is relevant to this review. Tantos, Japanese tantos, tanto is a dagger. Dagger is basically a knife with a blade of less than about a foot, one son, and generally speaking, they don't have a blade that's anything like that. They generally have a curve a bit more like the bug out in format. Usually don't have the drop point. You usually have a flatter back spine, sometimes a slightly curved one, but you almost never on traditional Japanese tantos see a knife shape like that. So calling it a tanto, I would think it should be a katana shape or something like that, because katana do have that shape as a rule, although again this part here isn't very often straight. It's usually curved, and there's usually a distinct line between the two facets, which this doesn't have. Anyway, I mention all of that for one very good reason, and that is because a lot of people will call this, the one that we're talking about here today, a reverse tanto. Well, my feeling is, if that's not a tanto, this isn't a reverse tanto, because it's not a reverse of that. But AO is one of those terms that's taken hold. That's probably what it is. I've also seen it described as a Wharncliffe. But a Wharncliffe has, I think, 2 distinct features, as we've discussed ad nauseum here in the last few weeks. For the one thing, it has a straight edge, and this has a curved edge. And for another, the blade curves from here, generally goes up a little, and then comes down in a continuous curve to the point. This has a corner here. A Wharncliffe doesn't have a corner. It could be, you could call this a modified lamb's foot, because you've got that distinct corner. It would have to be modified because there is a curve in this blade, which you wouldn't have on a traditional lamb's foot. Now, what do we like about this knife? Well, the first thing is it borrows from the bailout. Oops, sorry. Get it in my hand properly. The CPM M4 blade, and also I think it's a slightly darker shade of Cerakote, but it is Cerakote covered. It has also borrowed from the bailout. The texture pattern on the handle is very similar. On this, it's made a little bit more what you might call a satin finish. This is a matte finish. This is more of a sort of satiny finish. So it just looks a little bit more premium. They also changed up the pivot screw to just look a little bit more fancy. They're both axis locks, of course, and they both have reversible short pocket clips. Short pocket clip just looks like a normal pocket clip on this, because the knife is pretty small. It also came with this lanyard and this little, I think it's bronze bead, and the knife was available in I think 4 different colours. Most of the ones I've ever seen are green. I like this bronze colour though. I think it's very smart. So I think this would make a very suitable knife to carry in most places. And I know people have said, oh, it's awfully small, it's not big enough to do a full job. But what I would suggest is this. We have had pocket knives for hundreds of years, and the sort of size that they've been over the last, say, 200 plus years has been something akin to this. So if we look at this compared to the immunity here, the full immunity, you'll see that the blade length and the cutting edge are almost identical. If anything, it's slightly larger. It's certainly broader, and the handle of this is broader. Granted, the handle is a little bit shorter, but there is a bit more of it in that it's got more kind of girth to it. And I think really this little lanyard is probably an acknowledgement that Benchmade thought it was probably on the margin. And I might agree with them, but I actually think this would be a very good size to carry if you were in an office town environment or something like that. It's basically, the blade is 6.3 centimeters, which is 2.5 inches. They've done 2 automatic versions of it as well, including a California legal version, which actually has just a 1.9 inch blade, just to keep it under the 2-inch rule for California. So if you think this is small, you have to have a look at that. The other, I think it's called Auto Immunity, has the same blade as this, just it's an automatic. This one isn't automatic. This is the original one. So, having said I really like it very much, it's very light. The scales are aluminium, so they're not too heavy. The blade is thin and slicey. It's got some totally unnecessary jimping on the back. It's even thinner than the bailout's blade, and so there's no need for a sort of swedge or anything. But I think it's probably got 2 things that people have criticised. One is the size, but I really don't think that's an issue. I think this is a perfect knife for people who want a small knife. It's not perfect if you want a tactical folder like the bailout, or even a kind of full-size knife for camping and whatever. But if you just want something to stick in your pocket to go to the office and open an envelope or a parcel or cut a bit of string, this is actually, I think, the right size. The one huge problem with it is the price, and it is pretty unreal, to be honest. I don't often find it too difficult to justify the price of knives. I've even argued that Jack Wolf £300 slip joints are not excessively expensive. They're expensive, but they're not excessively so, mainly because of all the packaging and so forth you get with them. The fact they're made in China is not very attractive. This is made in America, and its price is about £245, which is the same sort of money. I don't know exactly, I haven't looked it up, but it's about the same sort of money as you could have either of these. And there's just twice as much of them. Now, it doesn't really cost that much less to make a knife that's half the size of one. It doesn't cost half as much. There is less machining obviously involved. There is less materials involved, but a lot of the factors that go into it are probably fairly fairly similar, and so the price is always going to be that sort of level, and you can't really avoid that, I suppose. And then if I'm also going to be fair to Benchmade, this little knife that I just showed beside it, which is from George Wostenholme, part of the Eggington group, it's a very beautiful knife. It's very lovely. I'm very, very attached to it. It's one of the most beautiful knives I've ever seen. But it is just a slip joint with, I believe it's a stainless steel blade. So it's probably 420 HC or something like that. And yet this cost £225. It's handmade in Sheffield by excellent knife makers, one of whom is Stephen Cocker. He doesn't make all of them himself, but he's certainly one of them. So, you know, this is a premium piece. It's very nicely done in this burl wood, but this is a very low volume limited edition piece. The Full Immunity is a mass-produced knife that will sell the world over in probably fairly large numbers, so it's more difficult to justify the high price. But I like this knife, and I think if I was in the market to be buying anything at the moment, this is a knife I would be interested in, because it's one you could use. Now, granted, it's a locking knife, so you can't take it out in the UK without good reason, but certainly around the house, this would be a lovely little knife to throw in your pocket. It's lightweight, it's capable, it will stay sharp for a long time, doesn't require a lot of servicing and so forth. So I quite like it. So that would be sort of my conclusion. It's a good little knife, and you do have to. I was going to say it's the old cry once, buy once, and this is probably that. This probably would last you a long, long time if it was your one and only knife. But it is still quite a lot of money for your one and only knife. I think, you know, only bonkers collectors like me are going to buy things like this. But this is for everyday people that just want a good knife to put in their pocket. So anyway, there we are. If you like this stuff, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of, I've got 6 more knives in this series that we'll be doing over the next few weeks. Please subscribe if you want to see them. Plus my main collection video, you'll have seen parts 1 and 2 so far on mother of pearl and stag, and the next one I think is going to be on desert ironwood, and that should hopefully be out fairly shortly. So subscribe, ring the bell if you want to see them. Thank you very much. Goodbye.